Welcome everyone to today's session, which is an introduction to social impact measurement. So in this topic, um, you will get an overview of some key concepts of social impact measurement and how to apply these in practice. Of course, the idea isn't that you would become an expert in social impact measurement, which is a fairly wide field in itself at the end of this session, but you will learn enough to dig deeper by yourself, or if you decide that you need to consult an expert further for the social impact measurement of your own organization, this could be an option to learn more about, right? Because the idea is that when you're developing your community enterprise, you want to make sure that it has impact and that you're making a real difference, whether it's in improving people's lives or protecting the environment or strengthening a community. The idea is that you would need to measure the impact that you're making, and in this way it would make it more accountable. So just a brief introduction to who we are. um, we are from the Accreditation Council for Entrepreneurial and Engaged Universities, and today I will be with you during this session, which just serves as an introduction. And in the next session, in the same topic, you will learn more about the key concepts. Um, and we are from the Accreditation Council for Entrepreneurial and Engaged Universities, me and my colleague Avencia. It's based here in Munster in Germany. So the learning objectives for this uh, session is to get an introduction to social impact measurement, as I've mentioned, and this includes the definition, the purpose, and the history of social impact measurement. And more specifically in this session, the idea is that you would get an introduction to the concept of social impact measurement, which includes the definition, the purpose, and the history. And in the next session, you will learn more about the basic concepts and tools for measuring social impact, such as the needs assessment, the theory of change, and the logic model. And you will also learn how to implement social impact measurement. And this would allow you in the end of this topic to reflect critically on the concept of social impact measurement, including some critiques of the whole concept. So what is social impact measurement? I could just read this out for you in the meantime. So social impact measurement is the measurement of social change for the targeted population attributed to the activities of an organization during a specific period of time. The change might be positive or negative, but there may be unintended consequences of one's actions to consider. So so in other words, what does this mean, right? In other words, this just means that it is the measurement of social change for a targeted population, right? So to measure the effects and outcomes of a particular social intervention, program, a project, it could be a certain policy which impacts a targeted population or a community. And the goal is to uh, determine whether this is creating a positive impact or whether it's creating the impact that we assume that it's creating. And finally, to understand to what extent we are having this outcome and to what extent are we having the intended objectives, and in what way is a community enterprise contributing to positive social change. But social impact measurement is not only a process, it's also a personal and an organizational attitude to where we're checking, are we getting involved for the sake of getting involved, or do we really want to help the target group as much as possible? And more than this, social impact measurement can also be understood as a variety of project management, which is adapted to the needs of community work. And social impact measurement typically involves collecting and analyzing data on a range of metrics, such as the change in attitude, in behaviors. There could be other socioeconomic indicators to assess the effectiveness of a program or an intervention. And this data is collected and it can be qualitative or quantitative based on what you think would suit your needs best. And sometimes the measurement could be direct or even indirect measures of impact. But it's also important to keep in mind that there could be some impact which we're unable to measure, and there could be certain unintended outcomes of our community work, which, if we are not careful in our measurement of the impact, or if we choose to measure only certain aspects, we might lose out on other impacts that are being created or generated as a result of our work. And so it's important to keep an open mind. And in this case, I could give an example of when I was working at a trekking organization, intended to which intended to give jobs to people who were working more locally. And this was in the Himalayan mountains in India. And one of the outcomes of this, so one of the intended outcomes was that there were more people locally who were receiving a job in in a new establishment, so thereby generating good economic activities, a higher wages, and therefore promising a better life for those who were joining the organization. But another impact was that this trekking organization brought together or invited several new tourists to enter the area. And without a proper framework for how to deal with waste management in the area, it became a frequent problem that there was a lot of trash left in the mountains, since they hadn't accounted for the fact that there would be so much excess waste and trash coming in without a mechanism to deal with it. So while the impact of the organization was focused on creating livelihoods, there were other unintended outcomes of the organization, which they, of course, later looked into and looked at how they could solve this crisis within their own organization. So this is just an example to understand that a community enterprise could be started with very noble aims, but it's important to consistently gain feedback and check what is the real impact, and if possible, to find ways in which to measure the social impact of the community enterprise. And as we've said previously, the aim of measuring the impact is to understand what impact certain interventions are having and whether these are having the impact which is intended for certain interventions. And the previous example would also support this point. And another big reason why it's important to measure social impact is that it promotes a culture of accountability of an enterprise or an organization. And what do we mean by promoting accountability? The idea is that to social impact measurement can provide a way to demonstrate accountability to stakeholders. This includes to funding bodies, to beneficiaries, and to the wider community, that the work that they promise to do is that they're able to demonstrate that they're able to do the work which they claim will have certain positive social outcomes. And what are some of the other reasons why we measure social impact, right? One of these reasons is to improve program effectiveness. And what does that mean? So by measuring social impact, we can identify what works and what doesn't, so that we can improve the effectiveness of programs and interventions. So we can identify the areas where change is needed and make adjustments to the programs in order to better achieve these results. And another big and very important reason why we measure social impact is to inform decision making, because social impact measurement is a tool, and it can be used as a tool to provide evidence which can be used to inform decisions about where to allocate resources, how to design programs and interventions. And by measuring social impact of different options, decision makers can choose the interventions that are most likely to be the most effective, and deliver the greatest benefits to a community through the social enterprise or a community enterprise. And as I've said in the previous slide, social impact measurement is often used by different NGOs and community enterprises to attract funding, because in that way they can demonstrate their real social impact. And in this way, they use this to attract funding from a range of different sources. And this could be from governments, other foundations, and even private donors. And of course, all of these funding agencies want to see what is the real impact that is being created by a community enterprise. Right. And the final reason, which we have mentioned here, is to contribute to social and environmental sustainability. What do we mean by this? So measuring social impact can have it can help organizations to understand the social and the environmental implications of their activities, right? And they need to take steps to minimize the negative impacts and to maximize the positive impacts. So this is a way in which social impact measurement can contribute to the environmental sustainability. And this is increasingly important in today's world. And so the idea is that overall social impact measurement is essential to ensure that programs or interventions or even the work of an enterprise is effective, that it's accountable, and that it's sustainable, and that it can, in the long run, continue to generate a positive social and environmental impact. And this form or this tool of social impact measurement, so this mechanism or this concept of social impact measurement can be implemented in community and social enterprises of all sizes and in all stages of development, even in cases of limited means. The idea is that an organization or a person at the head of an organization should have the mindset that this is an important step in contributing to the work of social or community enterprise, because they can, of course, increase their accountability. And it's more a matter of an attitude rather than having to create extensive surveys. Of course, because there are many different tools in which different ways in which this impact can be measured, which you will learn further in the next session, as this session is largely a brief introduction to what is social impact measurement. And now if we come to what is a short history of social impact measurement, so arguably it's not a new field. The history of social impact measurement can be traced back to the early 20th century, when social welfare organizations began to use data and they began to use evidence to evaluate their programs and services. But it wasn't until the 1960s and the 1970s that the concept of social impact measurement began to gain widespread attention. This is because during this time, there was a growing concern about the effectiveness of social welfare programs, and particularly in the United States, where this became popular first and became increasingly popular in the United States, where there were a series of high-profile studies that showed that many programs were not achieving their intended outcomes. So in response to this, there was a push to develop more rigorous evaluation methods and to use data and evidence to inform policy making and the practice and the implementation of these policies and welfare schemes. And increasingly, we see that in today's world, in different parts of the world where there are lots of social welfare schemes, and that it's important to continuously measure these schemes and to ensure that they're achieving their intended objectives and to ensure that resources aren't being wasted. Right. Yeah. And to go back to the point, so the development of social impact measurement was also influenced by the emergence of environmental and social justice movements, which drew attention to the negative impacts of industrialization and economic growth, which has on the environment and on vulnerable communities. Because, for example, again, I could give you an example that I know from India, where there was a huge multinational mining company which was established in a region that was a home to the indigenous tribal communities. And the impact was measured the following way, that by allowing this multinational mining company to work in that region to extract iron ore, which is processed for the production of aluminum. Um, it was said that the government would gain massive revenues, and this could be used further for the development of that region. But in reality, further studies years down the line showed that the environmental damage that was done, the degradation that was done, was not compensated for. The communities who lost their land in the process were not compensated for. And the schools that were built as a promise for compensation and for the welfare were were not staffed. So there were empty buildings, empty schools that were made, and nobody to attend them, no teachers to teach, and no students who had any idea of why these buildings were there. So again, this is a rare case, a rare example, but um, it just goes to show that the whole concept of social impact measurement could be quite complicated if it's not given the right attention, especially in such cases. Right. So all of these movements, especially the movements for social justice and environmental movements, have called for more holistic approaches to development, and therefore for the consideration of the social and environmental impacts alongside economic outcomes, which is increasingly important in today's world. And so with that, I would conclude today's session, and I hope that this has been a meaningful introduction to you, and I hope that in the next session you'll learn more about the more practical ways in which social impact measurement can be carried out. Thank you.